Now, I've actually always been a pretty big fan of the Peugeot 3008. I think it ticks a lot of boxes as a family car. It's pretty good looking, it's practical, and it returns decent fuel economy. In fact, I ran one for 6 months and 12,000 miles as a long-term test car and really enjoyed the ownership experience. But that was a 1.6 litre diesel car, and the world we live in is a rapidly changing place, particularly for diesel models. And now it might be the case that diesel owners are looking into plug-in hybrids, of which this is one. A new model year brings new facelift and new powertrain options. So let's see what Peugeot has to offer. Now, traditionally, the next part of this video would be me stood outside the car talking you through some of the design details. But Mother Nature has decided to forecast 21-mile-an-hour winds that's blowing everything sideways, so I've heroically decided to take shelter inside the car. The main focal point of the Peugeot 3008's facelift has to be the front of the car, where the bold, chromed grille that once sat between rakish headlights has been replaced with a much more modern and fluid design. It's actually quite difficult to put into words, this cascading matrix of slot gaps and reflective materials that sort of blend the grille into the solid bumper below. You still get those rather feline-looking lights, with a design motif that carries on along the edge of the bonnet. This new style statement for the 3008 is in keeping with its little brother, the 2008 that first introduced it. I have to say it's fresh and modern and certainly looks more individual in a very competitive class of stylish SUVs. Externally speaking, the rest of the changes are quite minimal, with the 3008's quite bold aesthetic appearance continuing from nose to tail. A chunky chiselled glasshouse sits above a few clean lines, while plastic cladding serves to bolster this car's SUV appearance. The blunt rear end of the 3008 retains those bold shoulders that integrate the really nice cat claw lights and complete what remains a really modern silhouette. The 3008 is a good looking car. This car being an Allure Premium example, it also gets a set of nice 18-inch alloy wheels. Moving into the more sheltered and far warmer interior of the car, and you'll find Peugeot's iCockpit design philosophy. Now, for those of you who don't speak car brochure, that basically means that it's got this tiered cockpit design with a smaller wheel that sits below a digital instrument display. Peugeot calls this display Digital Cockpit, and it's nicely animated and very customizable for the driving data that you want. Some particularly tall individuals have found the driving position of the steering wheel being lower a bit challenging, but for the vast majority of people, this hasn't proven a problem. Far from a bland sea of flat fascias and plastics, the interior is an interesting and premium place to be in the 3008. In terms of design, plenty of attention to detail has been paid. From the bright work to the different textures you'll find, it really does feel like an upmarket cabin. This specification includes a large 10-inch touchscreen infotainment display, which is a really nice large screen that's easier to use on the move. However, whilst it is running the latest software, it's not necessarily the most ergonomic out there. There's just a bit too much text. As standard, you can plug in your smartphone to run Apple CarPlay or Android Auto if you prefer those systems. However, slightly annoyingly, they don't take advantage of the large screen on offer. Flat, featureless surfaces are certainly not easy to use whilst driving, so a nice row of shortcut keys below make things more ergonomic. The part leather trim in Allure Premium coats a set of really nice supportive seats, which are excellent for long journeys. Bolstering this car's argument for being a good all-round family car is the space on offer to rear passengers. There is loads of headroom and plenty of legroom for the two outermost passengers. There's even a nice flat floor, so the middle passenger doesn't have to deal with any sort of transmission hump. However, the air vents do protrude into leg space for that occupant. Open the nice big square boot with a flat floor to present 395 litres of really usable space. And something that's often overlooked by some competitors is somewhere to store your charging cables. There's a nice little cubby under the floor in this 3008. I have to say rear visibility is somewhat compromised by that raked windscreen, however that is overcome to a degree with the Allure Premium models getting a reversing camera. So how about the hybrid element of this car? Well, under the bonnet you'll find a 1.6 litre, 4-cylinder turbocharged petrol engine, and that combines with an electric motor to exclusively power the front wheels. Now there is a near 300 brake horsepower all-wheel drive variant of this car, that obviously comes with a price premium and shares its platform with the DS7 plug-in hybrid. This 225 model produces 222 brake horsepower, 361 Newton meters of torque, and is supplemented by a 13.2 kilowatt hour battery. Now, putting many of those baffling numbers to one side, in more layman's terms, the idea is that you'd plug this car in at night, you'd set off on battery power. If you hit the motorway, it'll require more power, the petrol engine will kick in to supplement, or you could potentially do your whole commute on electricity alone, come home, plug it in. Either way, less CO2 out the tailpipes, more electricity being used. When it comes to this 3008, Peugeot reckons that in ideal conditions, its battery that's mounted low in the floor should get you 39 miles down the road in pure EV mode. And whilst that might be possible in Spain, where it's warm consistently, here in the UK we've recently experienced one of the coldest temperatures experienced in 60 years, and that has a detrimental effect on battery life. And so the best I've got out of this is about 16 miles this week. I know in warmer conditions, colleagues have got things like 22, 23 miles out of the battery, but it's still some way down on the claimed optimum figure. And you know, if you live in the UK, you can't just go by the figure that's printed in the brochure, because it's up to 39 miles. And that sort of turns this proposition on its head a little bit, I'm afraid, just because you go from a vehicle that could potentially do your commute purely on electricity with petrol power to supplement should you decide to travel further afield, to a vehicle that you're going to have to rely on its engine quite consistently. Now, don't get me wrong, it's still going to be cleaner to use the battery for some part of your journey than none of your journey, but it does put into question how effective the whole hybrid system is in this car. Like many plug-in hybrids, the 3008 has a series of selectable drive modes. One that I really like and want to highlight is e-save. Just like the DS7 that it shares this platform with, you can hit e-save, and what that does is forces the petrol engine to charge the battery, meaning that if you deplete your battery on the way to the motorway, whilst you're getting on with your motorway journey, you can arrive at your destination with a full battery, not having to worry about plugging in, and you can cruise about towns and cities and things with zero emissions and run on pure electric once again. And I quite like that, especially if you're in a situation where you don't necessarily have lots of chargers at your disposal. The fact that you can spend some of your journey that you'd probably be predominantly on petrol power anyway, topping up the battery and then using that, that's still more efficient than this being a purely combustion powered machine. Plugging in and charging from a standard wall box will take you about 3 hours and 45 minutes to gain a full charge once again, which is maybe a little long to loiter around a supermarket charger, but if you've got a charger on your driveway at home, then this might be a good fit. Now, as mentioned, I actually really like the Peugeot 3008. I think it looks great, and the one that I kept for 6 months was a wonderful thing to cover distance in. The hybrid on a day-to-day basis is a bit more of a mixed bag than either the petrol or diesel variant. It feels a little bit like a car of compromise at times. And by that I mean it feels a little bit heavier than it should do, perhaps because of that battery. And whilst there's plenty of grip and body rolls certainly kept in check better than you might expect for a tall vehicle, the trade-off is that the ride has been firmed up a little, and certainly at lower speeds it can seem a little bit brittle and a little bit crashy. I'm glad to say that what has always been one of the 3008's biggest assets is retained for the hybrid, in that it's just a nice place to spend prolonged periods of time. The seats are comfortable, this cabin is interesting to look at, it's got really nice quality materials, the tech on board is good, it's quiet and refined when you're cruising, it's a tranquil environment, it's somewhere where you can settle down and get on with the journey. And I think if you're covering distance in this car, you're going to be very happy with it. The flip side of that is that when this hybrid drivetrain is left to its own devices around town, and you're sort of mixing between stop-start traffic and slightly faster roads, the transition between electric to combustion and back again is a bit abrupt, a bit jarring. It's certainly not as seamless as it is in some competitors, and that's a little bit disappointing. Sometimes when you put your foot down, you suddenly need to get out of a junction. The car is thinking about what exactly it needs to do, as opposed to just providing you with, you know, a torque-filling boost from the battery immediately, with the engine seamlessly slipping in to take on to provide more power. It's just a little bit more obvious than that, and that's a bit of a shame. Don't get me wrong, as a complete package, this 3008 Hybrid is still a strong player in the SUV game. It's got plenty of practicality, it looks great, it handles neat enough, there's plenty of grip, you get that nice elevated driving position. But the bigger question is the compromises versus the petrol and diesel cars in this hybrid model really worthwhile? And I think when you really factor in things like the price tag as well, it becomes a little bit harder to swallow. That said, as a company car, as a plug-in hybrid for business use, it starts to make a lot more sense with a benefit in kind rate of just 10%. An entry-level but pleasingly well-equipped Peugeot 3008 starts at £27,000. However, for a hybrid model, you're looking at £37,000. If this Allure premium trim level ticks your boxes, you're looking at over £38,000. The 3008 has its merits, but some serious cost-benefit analysis needs to be done before taking the plunge. Head to yesauto.com for the latest car news and reviews, and don't forget to check us out on social media. We're in all the usual places such as Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. Simply search for Yes Auto.